Almost exactly 1 year ago from today, I created this same exact video, how I bought my first rental property at the age of 23. It actually did fairly well. It got a decent amount of views, quite a bit of interest, but as I go back and look at it, I can't help but cringe. The audio was terrible. I was driving while I was recording the entire thing. The video is filmed on a GoPro. Like, I don't even know what I was thinking. So now fast forward an entire year, after being on YouTube for an entire year, I'd like to think that I know a little bit more about audio, about filming, about the lighting, having everything set up, and even maybe a little bit better at telling a story as well. So this video I'm redoing to replace that video, and essentially I'm going over the topic of how I bought my first rental property at the age of 23 and how you can do the exact same thing that I did. Because I'm recreating this video and making it significantly less cringy, please subscribe down below and give me a thumbs up if you haven't already. So this story actually starts all the way back in the year 2015. I'm 27 now, but I was 23 at the time. I was single and I was broke. And when I say broke, I mean really, really broke. Like, I had just graduated from college and I maybe had $300 to my name and I could hardly afford to pay my rent. Because I was graduated, I was searching around for my first adult full-time job, and I finally found an offer. There's a job listing about 350 miles away from where I currently lived at the time in Utah. And so I applied, and to my surprise, I was offered the job. It was scary and it was terrifying, but I accepted the job offer for two main reasons. One, it was a job offering to pay me $40,000 a year, and two, C point A. Somebody was willing to give me $40,000 a year, so of course I said yes. And sadly, that was my only criteria. I was broke, I needed money, somebody was going to offer me said money, and so I uprooted my entire life and moved about 350 miles up north to accept this job. Halfway into the drive, I already felt like this was a poor decision because I had to stop at this gas station, and I did the math and I realized that my U-Haul with my car being towed behind it was getting a whopping 8 miles per gallon. I was only halfway at this point, but it cost me $150 to fill up that U-Haul to be able to make it the rest of the way. If I had been smarter back then, I think I would have tried to negotiate some relocation assistance or something, but that's besides the point. It was, I really say this just to kind of point out how truly broke I was at this point. I now had about $150 to my name. For the next 2 weeks when I got there, I lived in a friend's aunt's basement, sleeping on the most uncomfortable, pee-stained, animal smelling couch that you've ever seen. Like, it honestly looked like something out of like a New York City inner city apartment, you know, that you see in the movies. It was bad. I should be more grateful that I had a place to sleep for 2 weeks, but needless to say, I was very grateful to move out and finally get my own apartment. I eventually found two roommates and we moved into an apartment. I remember my portion of the rent and the deposit was about $700, which of course I didn't have because I wasn't starting my job yet, and so I had to borrow some money from my parents just to have a place to live. About 6 months later or so, I finally felt like I was kind of gaining some traction in life. I felt a little bit more stable. I had finally paid off my parents, paid back the $700, and I think I had about $2,500 to my name that I had just saved up from working this job. One day, completely out of the blue, I decided I'm gonna buy a house. I'm an adult, and of course that's what adults do. Adults buy houses, and so I'm going to buy a house. And it wasn't even, I'm gonna buy a rental property, it's, no, I'm gonna buy a house because I want a house and I'm an adult and I can. And so that's exactly what I did. I started shopping around, I started looking at houses, and I'm a fairly decisive person. I mean, for the most part, I know what I want. So I was looking for a house with 3 to 4 bedrooms, and it had to have a 2-car garage. And really that was my main criteria. At this point, I wasn't even smart enough to realize that this could be used as a rental property. Again, remember, I was just looking for a house for myself. I wasn't looking at shopping or how good the school district was or how close we were to the interstate, or, you know, any of this stuff. I wasn't worried about resale value for some crazy reason, but I didn't know any better. I just hadn't been in the real estate space yet, and so I just did the best that I could. Thinking back to it now, it kind of makes me cringe that I didn't consider any of these things before buying a house, but spoiler alert, it worked out okay in the end. So I have finally found the house that had a pretty good floor plan, and my main criteria was that there was enough space for hosting parties. And again, remember, I was 23 years old. It had a good sized yard, which was great for parties. It was far enough outside of town, away from people out in the county, which again was perfect for parties. And of course, it was priced just right so that I would have enough money left over for parties. I pulled the trigger, I made an offer, we haggled back and forth a little bit, but we finally decided on a price, and that price was $147,000. Okay, now just to show you how naive I was at this point, I made this offer without having a realtor, which now actually makes me feel like I was really smart, because if I can, I try to buy all of my properties now without a realtor. But at that point, I didn't know anything. So the seller's realtor actually called me up and said, "Hey, congratulations, you own a house." And I was ecstatic. I was elated that I bought a house. Now that was quickly diminished when the realtor said, "Okay, now you need to take $1,000 earnest money to the title company, and your closing costs should be anywhere between $4,000 to $6,000. Stupidly, I remember thinking to myself, I have no idea what she's talking about, but I'm just gonna say okay and worry about it later. I hung up with her, and then I had to Google what earnest money was. And I had been so caught up in the excitement of finding the house and, you know, searching for the right one that I honestly forgot about the down payment and all the closing costs that were going to have to be associated with it. Needless to say, I was a little bit nervous. I had 30 days to come up with about $5,000 or so, which I definitely didn't have. And so I started selling everything, anything and everything that I owned that had any value or worth at all, I sold to be able to come up with the money. While most people are going out and buying furniture and decor, I was selling everything that I had to come up with enough money to put down on this house. The big ticket item that I had at the time was my beloved motorcycle, which now I kind of just laugh, and yes, I was that guy, but this is a picture of my motorcycle, and please don't judge me too hard. You have to remember that I was 23. In the long run, I was able to sell my motorcycle for about $4,000, sold a couple other things, combined it with the $2,500 that I already had, and you know, it all worked out, and I was actually finally able to come up with enough money to close on this property within 30 days. I remember the light bulb moment that happened about a week or so later. I was over at my uncle's house, and I was eating dinner, and we were talking about my house, and he said, "That's awesome. Are you gonna have your roommates come in and help you pay the mortgage?" And I kind of paused for a second and was like, that's genius. Why hadn't I thought of that? I hadn't even told my roommates yet that I had bought a house and that I was going to be moving out. But instead, why didn't I just bring them with me and have them pay my mortgage? I had two perfectly qualified renters lined up, ready to go for me, and so that's exactly what happened. 3 weeks later, I closed on the house, I got the keys to the house, we moved in, and then we moved in all of my roommate stuff as well. So after moving in, I saved the master bedroom for myself. My other two previous roommates moved in. They were paying $350 a month, and then over the next 3 weeks or so, I posted an ad on Craigslist, and I found another guy to actually move in and rent the last bedroom for me for an additional $350 a month. With a house full of tenants, I was now making $1,050 per month, and my mortgage was only $830 a month. Not only did my tenants cover the entire mortgage every month, they also covered all the utilities, and even after paying all that, there was probably about 10 or 20 bucks left over each month, and so they bought me lunch once a month as well. The very first month, as I collected those rent checks, it felt, it was unbelievable. I honestly felt like I was stealing somehow, like what I was doing was wrong. It was better than Christmas because people were just giving me money, and on top of that, I got to live for free. So not only do I get to live in a house, I have a bigger backyard, more space, more privacy, I get to live for free, and I'm now not paying the $400 a month that I was paying previously in our apartment. So I'm making significantly more money, and I get to live in a house. It was mind blowing to me. Now, at the time, I had no idea that what I was doing was called house hacking. I didn't know that there was already a name for what I was doing. I wasn't involved in real estate at all. I wasn't involved with Bigger Pockets or anything like that, but that's exactly what this was. This was a house hack, and I had no idea that people did this on the regular to be able to buy rental properties. For the next 2 years, I lived rent-free. My tenants paid my mortgage, and it was great. 2 years later, things changed a little bit. I met my wife, I got a new job, things kind of happened, things changed a little bit, and so we actually ended up selling that very first house. But when I sold that property, after all the expenses, after everything was said and done, I walked away with a check for $40,000. From there, we moved on to scale into what we have now, which is our 12 units. But it was a pretty incredible way to get started, and it's something that I highly recommend that you do if you haven't already. I'm hoping that I'm able to paint a picture and show you just how broke I was and how you really don't have to have a lot of money to get started. In the beginning, I had about $5,000 invested, but since then we've just taken those profits and rolled them into more buildings and more buildings and more, and that's allowed us to scale and grow larger and larger. Some of you may be saying, yeah, well, even $5,000 is a lot to me. And I get it. It is a good sizable chunk of change, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at $500,000 buildings or $2 million buildings, $5,000 is a relatively small amount of money. But if you can scrounge up just a little bit, purchase a property, have roommates move in with you, or even if you purchase a duplex or a fourplex and you live in just one of the units and rent out the other 3 units, that's the best way to get started. I realize that not everybody wants to live with a bunch of guys or a bunch of girls, or maybe your situation's different. Maybe you're married and you just don't really want to do the roommate thing. I totally get it. But regardless, this could still work for you, and I highly recommend it because this has given us the funds to move into bigger and bigger deals. I did a video last week that I'll link up here talking about how we bought 12 units in 12 months. And it kind of recaps a little bit of this story, but shows what we did after this, how we sold this property and moved it into the next deals and the deals after that to scale and grow infinitely. I hope that this was beneficial to you, and please know that you can do this yourself if you're interested, and it's something that I highly recommend to get started investing in real estate if that interests you. Thanks so much for watching, and we will catch you guys next week.